off the bat, let me congratulate Montgomery moving forward. I didn't know much about your organization, and I hope you realize you are relatively unique. I mean, in all the communities I've lived in, we've had the Chamber of Commerce, we had the nonprofits and so forth, but we haven't had people come together like you are and collaborate. So right off the bat, I think you have a great shot at doing something with early learning here in this community. It's a great mechanism. And I will say, I am proud to be part of ReadyNation's CEO Task Force on Early Learning. You know, it's impressive to me how many CEOs around the country get it. You know, how many have really bought in. I always say having a passion around early learning is almost like getting religion. You know, once you get it, you got it. You know, I mean, and you just can't understand why people would not support and promote it. But there are a lot of CEOs around the country that are turned on with that, and for good reason. So I really want to talk about 4 areas today. The first is I'll share a little bit with you about why I became so passionate about early learning. Secondly, talk a little bit about the compelling evidence, but you're going to hear lots about compelling evidence here today, so I won't spend a lot of time on facts and figures. I will talk about some of the personal experiences I've had in advancing early learning in communities that I've lived in, so maybe that might give you some ideas and some insight. And finally, I'm going to close with what I think is some very impressive testimony to what the benefits of early learning are and what the lack of benefits are with the lack of early learning. So there's a person who wrote me a little note that I'm going to read at the end, and I think that'll give you some insights. So there's a, there. So this diagram is going to be up here through my whole talk. And if you don't remember anything else about what I say, hopefully you'll take this concept with you because I think it's so important. How many of you all have heard or remember seeing the TV show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Pretty good, you know. And you know, on that show, the quiz contestants have the opportunity to phone a friend if they're, need some help or support trying to answer a question. So I will confess that I phoned 2 friends in preparing my talk here. One happens to be my daughter, who is a nurse practitioner in an inner city medical clinic in Baltimore City. So she deals with lots of kids from the at-risk population. And the other is hopefully my future son-in-law, that they tell me that they're going to be getting married. And he is a consultant that works with states around the country on improving child services. And he's a child psychologist by trade. So obviously, I would be crazy not to talk to them about this before I put the talk together. So it was my son-in-law that came up with this showed me that diagram. And I think this is so important because it gets to this whole issue, which is a core value in our country, of equality. You know, I mean, the master of ceremonies there feels very good that he's being fair and treating everybody equal by saying, you know, we're going to give the same test to everybody. But this, to me, is exactly what happens every day in our country as and in the workforce. We bring people in, and, you know, they're not monkeys or whatever else, you know, they're not capable of passing that test. And we just say, well, we're giving the same test to everybody. We're being fair, you know. But we're really not. I mean, we're losing the battle because we're not giving an equal opportunity early in life. And I think that's, to me, that was a compelling message. So why did I get so excited about early learning? Well, when I was with Baltimore Gas and Electric, I had an opportunity to be chairman of the board of the largest residential treatment center in Maryland, Woodburn Center in Baltimore. And it was so discouraging to me how little positive impact we were having with those kids. They were between the ages of 12 and 17. They had been abused in some way. And we were trying to turn their lives around. And in some cases, we spent over $100,000 a year per child. And yet the outcomes were very little different than if they had not come through in the first place. So obviously, as a businessman, I'm like, you know, something is wrong here, right? So I started looking around, and I came across a document that had been prepared by the Committee for Economic Development that I'm also serving on the board of, chair of their education committee now. But this was in the mid-'90s, and it really opened my eyes. It talked, their point was the single best investment you can make in economic development in a community is early childhood learning for at-risk kids 0 to 4. That's the single best investment a community could make. And they've done all the studies that you've seen, you know, $4, $7, $9 payback for every dollar invested. And that got my attention. But I think the thing that really sold me is I talked to a medical researcher who had come to talk with a group of business folks, and she had a picture of the human brain at 4 years old. One of a child had been neglected, abused, whatever, you know, was this size. One who had gotten a lot of development and nurturing. It was double the size. And you never make up that difference. I mean, you've lost that battle at that early stage. So that really got my attention. And so I would say that with those two impacts, I pretty much signed up that I'm going to be, in my career, as I work with communities, I'm going to try to really advance early learning. There are numerous examples, and by the way, I've gotten into the compelling evidence piece. There are numerous examples about how this has worked. I mean, to me, one of my favorite examples is the Harlem Children's Zone. I don't know how many of you have heard of Harlem Children's Zone. Jeffrey Canada. I mean, he starts when, you know, a young lady in their catchment area becomes pregnant, and starts with prenatal care, right on up through home visitations and so forth. So, and tremendous success. You know, kids from the poorest of the poor going off to college. And so, I mean, and of course now he had a little bit of an advantage. He has investment banks in New York City and the Robin Hood Foundation, and they pretty much said to him, you know, you're not going to be resource limited. Let's just prove the concept. And so the resources obviously is an issue, and we'll talk about that later. But he did prove the concept, and that concept has been proven in a lot of communities around the country. Also, you know, from a business standpoint, the thing that, you know, just makes so much sense to me is we cannot, particularly with the demographics that we're seeing in this country, with the only population that's growing being immigrants and people in poverty, we cannot afford to not tap into those resources as we go forward. I saw Sarah shared with me some statistics that in the state of Maryland in 2020, 70% of the jobs in that state are going to require post-secondary education. And there's just no way we're going to be able to fill those jobs if we don't tap into the future generation and make sure that they get off to the right start and then continue with them through. So both from a community payback and from a business payback, I think the evidence is really compelling. But how do we go about changing the paradigm? How do we go about getting more commitment within the community? So in my career, there were 3 utility companies that I was CEO of. And you know, when you're CEO of a utility company, you're expected to get involved in the community. And so I did, and as I said, always focused first and foremost on trying to expand access to early childhood education, particularly for at-risk kids. And I would say I batted 600, you know, I mean, 666. One community I failed miserably, and the other 2 we were able to make some progress. You know, it's interesting, the community where I failed miserably was in Pennsylvania. And the folks there were so focused on the near-term issues of crime and drugs and budget problems and so forth, they just could not get their mind around spending something today that they're not going to see any benefit for years and years. And it was a very frustrating experience, but I think that's probably the case in a lot of communities around the country. You'd have a hard time moving the ball. I don't think that's going to be the case in Montgomery County. But the 2 areas where I did have some success, one was Atlantic City, and the other was Kansas City. No, you couldn't have 2 more different cities in the country than Atlantic City and Kansas City. So Atlantic City was very interesting. The casinos there had a responsibility to, or were required to pay money into the community for the benefit of the community. And they, the Casino Redevelopment Act or something like that required so much money to be spent. And they were so frustrated because the money was going in and they were not seeing any kind of return for it. There was probably graft, all kinds of issues, you know, involved there. But so a group of us got together, the local hospital, some other businessmen, myself. We invited the CEOs in. I even had some conversations with Mr. Trump on this on occasion. So I can tell you that, he at least got the concept intellectually. But so he, what we came up with was, first of all, you may be surprised to know the population of Atlantic City is 30,000. I mean, how many people knew there was that few people in Atlantic City proper? But so there are a limited number of elementary schools. We identified 2, and we said basically to the principals of those schools, we're going to give you the resources and the responsibility to make sure the kids within your catchment area come prepared to, for kindergarten. And that's going to start at birth. So we had peer mentors, who, by the way, it's a tremendous concept. People from within that same neighborhood who we paid a salary to go out and talk with the girl when she became pregnant, or when if she was having issues, to identify them early on and get help. They were much more effective, in my view, than the white social worker that comes with their little bag and said, we're here to help you, but we don't speak your language. We have no idea really what your issues are. So the peer mentors were very powerful, and they were directed by the principal of the school. So I believe through that whole process, we did get kids much better prepared to coming into the school, and I think they've gone on and been a lot more successful. I have lost track of it since the late 90s, but I thought that was a great model. The other area more recently was Kansas City, and I was there for 10 years, and it took me 8 years to get people focused on that issue. So, and I'll talk a little bit about this later. The drip method of communication is very important, but it finally hit them when I had some folks from the Committee for Economic Development come down and present facts, but then there was a businessman who was a billionaire in Wichita, who decided he was going to pay back. And he got up and gave this talk about all the research he had done, where could he best invest. And he concluded the best thing he could do was to start some early learning centers for at-risk kids in Wichita. And that really, and talked about all the benefits that came out of that. That really got people's attention. I can remember Don Hall from Hallmark came up to me and said, so why aren't we doing this? I'm like, I've been talking for 8 years about why we're not doing this. But, finally the light turned on after the cumulative message. Now, Kansas City has an early learning commission. The mayor is part of it, elected officials, the business people. They're looking at funding sources, including, believe it or not, raising property taxes, which I know is a, big issue. But they're saying that this is the single best, highest impact initiative that we can have in the community. And it's the Chamber of Commerce #1 initiative. So anyway, so that's some examples, I guess, of how over time you can have an impact. Let me just read one thing to you very quickly, and then I'll conclude with some thoughts about how I think you guys can move forward. So this is my other friend. This is from my daughter, and I think this brings the value of early learning to life. And in fact, it was so good when she sent me the note, I talked to Sarah, I said, I'm not going to paraphrase this, I'm just going to read it, because I think it just, it gives you the vision of what's right and what's wrong in the area of early education. So again, she's a nurse practitioner in the inner city of Baltimore. She says, we should definitely talk about this. I have a few ideas, and not based on research, just my own experience. There is an ever-widening gap that I see between my patients and my daughter Zoe. I have a bunch of kids in my clinic that are Zoe's age, and when she was an infant, I would always compare milestones to theirs, and often they were ahead of Zoe. I would swallow my mom pride and congratulate the parents on a kid that was doing well. However, now, at age 4, the disparities are glaring and heart-wrenching. Zoe is only in pre-K, but she can write her name about 15 sight words, recognize 15 sight words. She writes all of her numbers up to 100, knows simple addition and subtraction, takes on leadership roles at the school, like a line leader and door holder and crayon distributor. Important roles, right? She's learning how to work as a team, manage her emotions. Anybody who has a 4-year-old know how important that is. I'm not sure she's got it down 100%. She keeps a good schedule with the right amount of sleep. Her counterparts, on the other hand, that I see in my clinic are falling behind in every benchmark. They're barely coloring. They cannot write any letters. They do not know the sounds of letters. They have not started numbers, and they have very few books at home. They keep the hours of their parents interesting and are often staying up until 2 in the morning and sleeping until noon, which obviously does not help learning. They often have 6 or more hours of screen time a day, and the diet is poor and inconsistent. I have parents of 4-year-olds asking me to get their children evaluated by a psychiatrist because their tantrums are out of control and the parents are already labeling their children as ADHD. But the children really have no outlet for their energy. Zoe's being rewarded for her energy. These kids are getting punished for it. I see 6-year-olds in my clinic that are matching what Zoe is doing now. Yet at 6, Zoe will have her first assignment and independently writing a book report. Can't imagine how these kids will ever catch up, and the gap only continues to widen. So, and there's no way the parents can do this on their own. The kids need a better plan. So I'll end with that. I think that's pretty compelling. One thing I will, there's one other point I wanted to make, and that is about this drip method. I've always believed in it as an executive in trying to change culture in a company. How many of you all are familiar with how zoysia grass is planted? Okay, you basically plant plugs like every foot, right? And gradually it grows and kills off the other grass. So you might have in a year or two, you might have nice. I used to love it as a paper boy. It's the softest grass, to walk across the street. But that is how you change a community. That's how you change culture. You need plugs of zoysia. You all are plugs of zoysia grass. And you need to find every opportunity that you have, every contact, every connection you have to get this vision out there. It requires a missionary zeal. But I've seen it done, and I think you have a great chance of doing it here in Montgomery County. So thank you.